The research that we've done, and it's genuinely petrifying, the research, it shows that 90% of people see bad behavior in the workplace, and only 30% of them speak up. And the implications that has for morale, for employee satisfaction, for customer satisfaction, for the bottom line is extraordinary. And what we don't see, though, is any difference between men and women. We don't see any difference between level of career.
Welcome to another episode of peopleHum interview series. I'm your host Aishwarya Jain, and let's begin with a quick introduction of peopleHum. So peopleHum is an end-to-end, one-view integrated human capital management automation platform, the winner of the 2019 Global Cody Award for HCM, that is specifically built for crafted employee experiences and the future of work. We run the peopleHum blog and video channel, which receives upwards of 200,000 visitors a year and publish around 2 interviews with well-known names globally every month. And now for our guest, Don Metcalfe is the Managing Director of PDSI and EA. They help individuals, teams, and organizations drive behavioral and cultural change. She's also the author of the Hard Talk Handbook and Managing the Matrix. Dawn is a regular Forbes contributor and speaks to media, on the radio, and at international conferences on all things workplace culture and transformation. We're extremely happy and honored to have her on our interview series today. Welcome, Dawn. We're thrilled to have you.
It's absolutely my pleasure to be here, and tragically not too many international conferences at the moment, but hopefully back on a plane again soon.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for making time for us. So Dawn, let's begin a little about, how has it been for you in your career? You've had quite an eventful career. So tell us a little about, what you've been through and how have you gotten to this beautiful place here today?
Well, yes, this beautiful place, as you can probably see behind me, and possibly you can hear as well, I'm currently under, I was under lockdown. I'm currently now grounded in Sri Lanka, in a very, very beautiful house that I try to come to as often as I possibly can, always. It's the place that I come to run away from the business of Dubai and to sit and read and write and think, and that's where the books get written and speeches get written and things like that. And ironically, I was here in order to put together some scripts for online learning, which we didn't get around to producing because everything shut down around me. But yes, I'm here in Sri Lanka. But before I was in Sri Lanka, I'm based normally in Dubai, where I've been for 12 years. Before that, I was in London. Before that, Thailand. Before that, China. Before that, Japan. Before that, the UK. And before that, Spain, France, and the UK. But I am originally from Ireland. So yeah, and lots of different places, lots of different adventures.
Wow, this is so adventurous. I think, you've had so many beautiful experiences, and traveling definitely, helps you get more enriched, and you have lived in.
I've been very, very lucky.
Yeah, you've lived in like almost 7 countries. So, what can you tell us about leadership styles that you have seen across these countries?
Well, look, I think, we always say don't stereotype, don't generalize, but I think we can, to some extent, acknowledge that different styles tend to come from different countries, in the same way that we have different national cultures. And national cultures are one of those filters that affect how we see the world and, of course, therefore, how we behave. So, for example, we might have different attitudes towards hierarchy are prevalent in Australia than they are in India, for example. But how I react to that leadership style says, I suppose, as much about me as it does about what actual differences there are. And also, I think it's important to acknowledge that places change over time. If you think of India 100 years ago and you think of India today, there's definitely different expectations around what it means to be a leader. My country, Ireland, same thing. My father, when he was just starting out, the leadership style was literally to clip him on the side of the ear and tell him to be quiet if he dared question his superiors. So these things, they change over time. Our values, I think, stay the same, our national values, but they're expressed differently. So people still, for example, want to socialize, but they're less likely to do that over a boozy lunch now than they would have done in the past. My concern, I think, is when people use national culture to excuse bad leadership traits. So, for example, what do you expect? These people never speak up, or of course these people are going to catastrophize. That's just the way they are. that's what worries me when we talk about leadership and national culture.
Mhm. Absolutely. I think, like you said, our values still remain the same, but our leadership styles could change depending on geography or depending on how you've been born and brought up in a different culture. And what do you think?
It's just one of the filters.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So, how do you think, how can organizations go about setting up a differentiated culture to attract, really good talent and to ensure a higher chance of business success?
Look, in my opinion, and I think, in the research backs me up on this, is that culture is everything because it touches everything and it is touched by everything. Because when we talk about culture, what we're really talking about is an amalgamation of all the behaviors that we see in an organization. It's what we do when nobody's looking. It's simply the way we do things around here. But that doesn't mean that all culture should be the same. We need culture. We need to have a culture that supports our own strategic objectives. So it would be unlikely that you would want to have the same culture in a tech startup as you would in a merchant bank, for example. You might see similar values, but again, those behaviors, that culture will express itself differently. I think it is absolutely true that that culture will make a difference to attracting talent, but it's not difficult to get culture right. It is actually very simple, but it does take a huge amount of hard work. So it's not difficult, but it is hard. In fact, the new book, I was supposed to have a book out at the end of this month. In fact, we were going to launch it at the SHRM conference in San Diego. So tragically, that's not happening. But that book is all about culture. I'm rewriting it at the moment to acknowledge that we have to think about how to use the levers that I talk about differently now that we're in this virtual or at least semi-virtual world. But yeah, I'm hoping it'll come out very soon.
Mhm.
If you like free information, by the way, on that, and we give away a lot of resources around culture and around behavior. If you go to metcalfe.com, you can sign up there and you'll get the newsletter.
Absolutely. I think everybody must learn about culture, and it would be great to actually have a repository where you can get a lot of enriching and I would say global knowledge, and that's always kind of valuable, right? Um, the other thing I want to talk about, Don, is attitude beats aptitude for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. We've heard that, right? So what do you look for in leaders that differentiate them in their attitude towards employees, customers, or be it even business?
So I think what I want to see in senior leadership is two things. It's humility and then confidence. And that may seem counterintuitive, those two things, but I don't think it is. So when I say humility, I mean the humility to recognize that the world is complicated and that they're not Google, that they don't know everything. And then, the confidence to make a stand, to take a stand, and to speak up and to hold people accountable. So on the one hand, humility to me, that means that you work hard to get other people around you to speak up, and then the confidence in order to be able to speak up yourself and draw that line in the sand that says this is who we are. If you're not going to behave the way we think in this organization you should behave, if your attitude doesn't reflect what we want, then we don't need you. I had an amazing conversation with a client the other day a potential client. I'm hoping to do some work with them around this culture, in fact, and to do it remotely, to do a cultural transformation project remotely, which is going to be loads of fun. We're going to work it out together how to do it. But what she was telling me was that what I asked her the question, how far behind this, excuse me, I asked her the question, how much behind this are your senior leadership? And she said, oh, listen, we're not just worried about hiring the right people and getting rid of the right people in terms of employees. We're concerned about that in terms of our customers. We're concerned about that in terms of our suppliers. So it's not just about the attitude of the employees. It's about everybody that you're dealing with.
Mhm. Absolutely, and I think because all of us are working remotely, it's becoming a little more difficult to maintain the culture that you used to maintain at workplaces. Do you have any suggestions on how leaders can go about really in remotely engaging with their teams?
Yeah, and I think you're right. There's the words there. The optimal words are engaging with. I think we're all becoming just that little bit more human. We're being forced to. We're in each other's homes like this in a way that we never were before. We're dealing with poor sound quality and people doing this on rocky videos. I think it's there's no point pretending anymore, putting up that facade of being perfect and showing the other humans in your organization that you too are human is a real start there. But I'm not going to kid you. If, of course, it is really difficult, and I don't think anybody has the answer. At the moment, I'm amused by all the people who are suddenly experts in leading in the time of COVID or coaching in the time of COVID. I mean, how are you an expert in that? We're literally all just working it out together. So that's what I'm excited about is working with clients to go, okay, well, we're all clever people. We know what works in the real world. So let's see how we can translate that into a virtual world, but also what are the opportunities in the virtual world that we just didn't have previously? How can we really harness the positives without pretending that there aren't absolutely negatives to the fact that we're all working at home?
Yeah, I think it's more of like a trial and error situation because none of us is we've never been through such a situation. So, as you said, you cannot claim that you're experts in leading under such circumstances, and it's about everything comes to test at this point in time. And, so do you believe that the pandemic has changed the expectations and the nature of the role of human resources? And do you think that it's now changed very, very extensively for the future as well?
So look, I'm not an HR specialist, so I wouldn't dare to speculate on the future of HR. But I have heard from leaders that they find themselves a lot more dependent on HR in both. And maybe this is a controversial thing to say, but when I think of HR, I think of HR as being on both sides of the equation. So on the one hand, they're there to look after the employees' well-being, but they're also there to look after the company's bottom line. And let's acknowledge that sometimes those things are in contradiction. But what I'm hearing from leaders is that they're really finding HR useful in dealing with that contradiction and navigating that pathway. But again, as I say, I'm no expert in HR. I might make some guesses about L&D, but even then, listen, I don't know what the world is going to look like in 6 weeks, never mind in 6 months. So I don't know what the next norm. I can just about work out what the next normal is in terms of the future. Nah, I'm no Nostradamus.
Yeah, all right. When we talk about generations, right? You've got millennials, you've got Gen Z, you've got the baby boomers, and especially for leaders that are young and they're just, going to be a leader, or they're just started or they've commenced their journey to leadership. There are a lot of different culture preferences, for somebody who is already experienced, 20 years of experience as a leader, whereas there are people who are just starting out, right? So there are cultural differences, and now the millennial generation is forming a major percentage of the current day workforce. So do you think there are any specific traits that leaders need to be aware of while working with that generation?
I think it's an interesting question, and like I acknowledge that what you're saying is absolutely true. That there are different generations in the workplace, but it amuses me when we talk about millennials. I'm coaching a millennial right now. He's 35, 34 years old, so he's one of the older millennials, but he's still a millennial. He's got kids. He's got numerous mortgages. He's leading a huge organization across the whole of the Middle East. He's a proper grown-up. So I think we need to be careful about that. And millennials are only a little bit younger than us. What worries me is when we have the C, what I'm assuming we're going to call the C generation, right? The guys coming out now during COVID. Whatever they were going to be called, I'm assuming now they're going to be the C generation. They're the ones that are going to, I think, bewilder us a lot more. But I don't think human beings change that dramatically through generations. There's a continuum of change. And if I think about how millennials, the way millennials are talked about in the workplace as being, entitled and opinionated and all these things, 'twas ever thus, right? Everybody always says the younger generation is a little bit more annoying than we were. But I think of it more as being a continuum of higher expectations, right? So what are we annoyed about? That they want to be recognized, that they want to be treated like human beings? Come on, that seems like a good thing. um, I do think, there may be very high expectations in terms of speed of development. But also, to be fair, these guys, a lot of them came out into the workplace. If you came out into the workplace 12 years ago, that means you came out into the workplace in 2008, and now you're going through 2020. Yeah, I think if you've got high expectations and you expect to be looked after, I think that's probably reasonable. This has been a tough few years.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. And I think you've been to since you've like experienced so many different cultures. Do you also see a difference between the younger generations of one particular country being very different from the others, and what is their mindset? If you could shed some light on that.
So I think that's, again, a very interesting question, and I'm not sure I've got a great answer for it. But I do think that if you the differences were probably bigger in the past. But then, look, some of that's going to be, I live in Dubai, right? So I'm surrounded by third culture people. I'm surrounded by people who have parents from different countries, who were brought up in different countries, who live constantly in this global environment. So maybe I'm talking nonsense, but my sense is that the difference between my father's generation, a Lebanese and an Indian and an Irish person 50 years ago, is going to be more pronounced than it would be today. I think today we're more likely to find our tribes, people who are like us but in different countries, simply because of social media, because of the internet. And maybe when we move virtually, that's going to be something that is further facilitated. Maybe that's one of the changes. Actually, another change that we were talking about, myself and some friends the other day, was about networking. So it's all very well if you've got 20 years of networking behind you and a really nice cohort of people that you trust and that in the real world, and you have to move virtually. If you're entering the workplace today, how do you rebuild that? And okay, there's loads of cool tools that you can use for onboarding, but the responsibility to really work hard and build those one-to-one relationships is much stronger now on people coming into the workforce. They're going to have to really take it upon themselves to reach out and wave up to the grown-ups and say, hey, don't forget me, because otherwise they will be forgotten, I fear.
Yeah, it's certainly going to take a lot of effort, that's for sure. But do you think that you can pin down culture to just one person? So let's say there is the chief people officer of an organization. Do you think that only that person is responsible for the culture?
Oh, God forbid. No, this is the worst thing, right? When it becomes an HR problem, no, it can't be done. So as I said earlier, one of my first questions was, how much senior support do you have for this project? Because if there isn't senior support there, what's the point in doing it? It's never going to work. So this has to be from the top in terms of making the decision about what kind of culture you as an organization are prepared to support. But it also has to be everybody in this organization's role to be those cultural carriers. It can't be, the grown-ups. It can't be, well, I'm waiting. I see somebody doing something that's wrong. I see somebody behaving in a way that's against our culture, so I'm going to tell the team leader. Nonsense. We're all everybody by definition in the workplace is an adult. You see somebody doing something wrong, get the skills to be able to speak up. And if your organization won't allow you to do that, then seriously, then you need to leave, because that's not the organization that they say they are. And I'm aware that saying that in the middle of a time when everybody's so worried about their jobs is potentially controversial.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. And do you also think that, especially when it comes to speaking up and calling out what's happening wrongly in the organization, do you think that women are afraid in doing that, or are they just not trained to do that well?
So the research that we've done, and it's genuinely petrifying, the research, it shows that 90% of people see bad behavior in the workplace, and only 30% of them speak up. And the implications that has for morale, for employee satisfaction, for customer satisfaction, for the bottom line, is extraordinary. And what we don't see, though, is any difference between men and women. We don't see any difference between level of career or seniority. We don't see any difference between nationalities. Basically, everybody hates speaking up, like everybody. It's like a superpower if you can do it properly. But it's hugely uncomfortable. Unless you're a psychopath, it is not fun to give people bad news. And unless you're a sadomasochist, it's not fun to hear bad news. So, what we're asking people to do here is to do something that feels really uncomfortable and that our brains are basically set up to make us really bad at. So, it is tough. There's a reason we called it hard talk. It's not easy.
Yeah, I agree. I think a lot of organizations face this issue where they don't call out, problems in the organization at that point in time, and especially more conservative cultures face a lot of problem. And I mean, we need so much training just to speak out, to be on the right path.
Yeah, but listen, it can't just be about training, though, right? And that may sound like a crazy thing to say as somebody who does a lot of training, but it can't just be about training. So we have to think about where behaviors come from. And I love this tool. I've been talking about it, I don't know how much in the last few days, but it's called 6 Sources. It's not our IP, although we do mention it in the book. And there are lots of other tools in the book that are our IP, but this is a really cool tool. So it looks at motivation, and so what it does is it says, okay, where does behavior come from? And it comes from 2 places. It comes from motivation and it comes from ability. You need to have both of these things, right? So if you don't have people motivated, there's no point training them. But if they are trained and unmotivated, then you've got the same problem. You've got the behavior not arriving like you want it to be, not exhibiting like you want it to be. But it's not just about motivation and ability in terms of personal, as in my motivation or ability. It's also social motivation and ability. So are the people around me motivating me to behave in appropriate ways, and are they giving me the necessary resources to do so? And then it looks at structural motivation and ability. So structural motivation being all about the comp and bends, right? So am I getting paid to behave like this? Am I being penalized financially if I don't? And then structural ability is how is the environment, just the physical environment set up? Does it make it easier for you to behave in the way that the organization wants you to? So I'll give you an example. We were asked to go in and work with a telco to do some, as you say, training, because they said, listen, we want to do a cultural change project. We've got somebody working in, and what they said is we need training. So if you could do some training on difficult conversations. We said, sure, we'll do the hard talk training. So I went in, spoke to the senior leaders, spoke to the middle managers, finally got down to the problem. So the problem, as had been identified by the organization, was that the customer service people weren't speaking to the engineers. And so as a result, they were having to spend more time talking to the customers, and they weren't calling customers back, and customers were getting worse service, and everybody was unhappy. And the engineers were unhappy, nobody was happy. So we said, okay, well, why aren't you speaking up? Thinking, okay, we'll find out that if it's that they're worried about their bosses, or they're worried about the engineers being mean to them, or, we're just trying a diagnostic to work out. And they said, oh, no, well, we can't. And we said, well, what do you mean you can't? And they said, well, we just can't. We can't let the engineers know because we physically don't have the ability to do that. We can't make outgoing calls, and we can't do outgoing emails. So we can't have those difficult conversations with the engineers. And so then my job becomes going back to the senior management and going, so I've saved you a lot of money on training, but you're going to have to change the systems.
That is so interesting. That makes so much sense. It's really, as you said, it's really not all about training, but it's so many other factors as well. And
but please do training still, though. We still want you to do training, guys. It's still important.
Yes, it's still important.
Please go to Metcalfe.com to learn all about the training that we're doing virtually.
Yes, absolutely. I'm a total advocate for that. So, and with that, I'm going to wrap up this interview with the last question. If you have any other important sound bites that you would like to leave our audience with.
I think my soundbite is probably something that we've got on the Hard Talk website that says, nothing changes without a conversation. So it can be very difficult to listen and to hear things that we don't want to. And it can be very difficult to speak up and tell people things that maybe they don't want to hear in that moment. But without the ability to do that effectively and to do so whilst building relationships, we're doomed.
This is something that all of us really need to understand and to feel and to do it, which will help
Not
us.
just in business.
Yeah, it will help us be better individuals and to do the right thing. So thank you so much for that. It was a pleasure talking to you, Dawn, and really appreciate
Absolutely my pleasure. Hi everyone from Sri Lanka.
your time. Yeah. Thank you so much. Take care and have a great and positive day ahead.
Thank you. Talk to you soon, Ash. Bye.
Bye bye.